Everyone said Daniel Hartley was unreachable, a ghost in his own house. My best friend Emma would whisper it like a warning. Don't take it personally if Dad doesn't talk. He hasn't been the same since Mom died. The neighborhood had a name for him, the widower. Like it was a species, a cautionary tale about what happens when you love someone too much and lose them. But here's the truth they didn't see. He wasn't unreachable. He was just waiting for someone brave enough to stay. And I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. This story almost didn't get told. My mother said I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers sharing stories like this. Stories that don't fit into neat little boxes. Stories about the kind of love that makes people uncomfortable. But if you're still listening right now, you already know why this matters. You know that some connections can't be explained, only felt. So before I cross the line that changed everything, I'm asking you to cross one too. Subscribe to the Obsessive script. Help me prove that stories like this, the ones that were never meant to stay silent, deserve to be heard. Because what happened between Daniel and me, it wasn't wrong. It was inevitable. Now let me show you why. It was late October. Emma had gone to bed early, and I'd come downstairs for water. The house smelled like old wood and lavender, her mother's scent, still clinging to the curtains even 2 years after the funeral. The kitchen light was off, but the living room lamp was on, casting long shadows across the hardwood. That's when I saw him. Daniel was sitting in the armchair by the window, staring at nothing. Not reading, not watching TV, just existing. His hands were folded in his lap, and there was a photo album open on the side table. I could see the edge of a wedding photo from where I stood, a glimpse of white lace and a smile that no longer existed in this house. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Each second felt like a small violence in the silence. Application. I should have gone back upstairs. That's what polite people do. That's what safe people do. You see someone in their private grief and you give them the dignity of invisibility. You pretend you didn't see. You pretend they're fine. But I didn't. I walked into the living room, my bare feet silent on the floor, and I sat down on the couch across from him. The leather was cold against my legs. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, just kept staring out that window like he was waiting for someone who would never come home. The rain had started. I could hear it tapping against the glass, gentle and persistent. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. The muscle there jumped. "Do what?" "Pretend you're fine when Emma's around. Pretend you're fine when anyone's around." Framing. I said it because I'd been watching him for months, not in a creepy way, in the way you watch someone slowly disappearing and no one else seems to notice. Watching the way he'd smile when Emma talked about college, this bright, performative thing that never reached his eyes, then disappear into a study the moment she left the room. Watching the way he'd cook dinner with too much food, like his hands still hadn't learned the math of loss, still setting the table for 3 instead of 2. Watching the way he'd pause in doorways, his hand on the frame, like he was still expecting to hear her voice calling him from another room. "Daniel, did you remember to?" But the house was always silent. He wasn't unreachable. He was drowning. And everyone was so busy being polite, so busy tiptoeing around his grief like it was a sleeping monster, they'd stopped throwing him a rope. Someone needed to dive in. Rehook. He finally looked at me, and the expression on his face, God, I wasn't ready for it. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, at least not recently, from exhaustion, from carrying a grief so heavy it had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there in the wedding photos. Lines around his mouth, between his eyebrows, like sorrow had taken a chisel to him. He was 46 but looked older. Grief does that. It ages you in ways that have nothing to do with time. "You should go to bed," he said, but his voice had no force behind it. It was the voice of someone going through motions, saying things because they're supposed to be said. "So should you." "I don't sleep much anymore." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather. The air between us felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks, like the held breath before a confession. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, closing the distance between us by inches. What was her name? Her real name. Not Mom, not my wife. Her name. He blinked, surprised. His eyebrows drew together slightly, like I'd asked him something in a foreign language, like the question didn't compute. No one had asked him that. Not in 2 years. Everyone talked around her. "I'm sorry for your loss. She's in a better place. Time heals all wounds." Empty platitudes that meant nothing, that required nothing, that let everyone feel like they'd done their duty without actually having to sit in the uncomfortable truth of his pain. "Catherine," he said finally, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. "Kathy." The name hung in the air between us. Real, solid, a person, not a ghost. "Tell me about her." "Why?" It wasn't defensive, it was genuine, confused, like he couldn't fathom why a 23-year-old girl, his daughter's best friend, would want to hear about his dead wife at 11 o'clock at night. "Because," I said, and I made sure he was looking at me when I said it. "Everyone's so afraid of making you sad that they've erased her. And that's worse than sadness." I said it because it was true. Emma never mentioned her mom around him anymore. She'd told me once, voice small, "It just makes him so sad. I don't want to hurt him." The neighbors changed the subject if Kathy's name came up, steering conversations toward weather and sports and anything safe. Even the photos in the house had been slowly disappearing, tucked away in drawers by well-meaning friends who thought it would help him move on. But grief doesn't work like that. You can't move on from someone by pretending they never existed. You can't heal a wound by refusing to look at it. You move on by keeping them alive in the stories you tell, by saying their name, by remembering the way they burned toast and hummed off key and forgot to buy milk. You move on by not moving on, not completely. He stared at me for a long moment. The clock ticked, the rain fell, and then he did something I didn't expect. He started to cry. Not loud, heaving sobs. Quiet ones. The kind that shake your shoulders but don't make a sound. The kind that come from a place so deep you didn't even know it existed until it breaks open. His hand came up to cover his face, and his whole body curled inward, like he was trying to make himself smaller, trying to disappear. The lamp cast half his face in shadow. I could see his wedding ring catching the light, gold, worn smooth from years of wear. He still turned it sometimes. I'd noticed that. A nervous habit, or maybe a prayer. I should have left. That's what you do when someone's crying. You give them space. You let them have their dignity. You pretend you didn't see them break so they can pretend they didn't break in front of you. It's a social contract we all agree to, this polite fiction that we're all fine all the time. But I didn't leave. I got up from the couch, crossed the space between us, maybe 6 feet, maybe a million miles, and knelt in front of his chair. The hardwood was cold against my knees. I could smell his cologne, faint now at the end of the day. Cedar and something else. Something warm. I didn't touch him, not yet. I just stayed there, close enough that he knew he wasn't alone. Close enough that he could feel my presence like a hand on his shoulder, even though my hands were still folded in my lap. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice muffled behind his hand. "I'm sorry, I don't do this." "You should," I whispered. "You should do this more." He shook his head, still hiding his face. "It's been 2 years. People keep saying I should be over it by now." "People are idiots." That got a sound out of him. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something in between. 2 years, 2 decades, 2 centuries, I said. "It doesn't matter. You loved her. You don't just stop." His hand dropped from his face. His eyes were red, wet, devastated. "Everyone wants me to. I don't." And then I did the thing no one else would do. The thing that crossed every unspoken boundary between us. I reached out and took his hands. They were cold, shaking. Larger than mine, rougher, with calluses on the palms from the woodworking he did in the garage. The hobby he'd taken up after Kathy died because he needed something to do with his hands, something to keep them busy so they wouldn't reach for her in his sleep. He looked at our joined hands like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Like I'd just reached into his chest and pulled out something he'd been trying to bury for 2 years. Something raw and bleeding and too painful to look at. But I didn't let go. Because I knew that if I did, he'd shove it all back down. He'd apologize. He'd wipe his face and clear his throat and put the mask back on. The one that said, "I'm fine, I'm handling it, don't worry about me." And he'd keep drowning in this house that smelled like lavender and loss. So I held on. "Tell me about her," I said again, softer this time. "Please." His throat worked. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him warring with himself. The part that wanted to be strong, to be the dad, to be the man who had it all together. And the part that was so tired of pretending. The tired part won. "She hated mornings," he said finally, his voice rough. "Kathy. She was impossible before coffee. Like a bear." I smiled, squeezed his hands. "Tell me more." And he did. We sat there for hours. Me on the floor, him in that chair, our hands still clasped like a lifeline neither of us wanted to let go of. The rain kept falling outside, steady and soft. The clock kept ticking. And Daniel talked. He told me about the way Kathy used to burn toast every Sunday and refused to admit it. "It's not burnt, it's crispy," she'd say, scraping black crumbs into the sink. About the way she'd hum off-key in the shower, always the same song, some old Fleetwood Mac tune he could never remember the name of. About how she'd steal his hoodies and then claim she had no idea where they'd gone, even though she was literally wearing one. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of details that make up a life. "She had this laugh," he said, and his voice went soft, distant. This ridiculous, snorting laugh when something really got her. She hated it. She'd always cover her mouth. But I loved it. I'd try to make her laugh like that as much as possible just to hear it. I could picture it. This woman I'd never met, laughing with her hand over her mouth, eyes crinkled at the corners. Daniel, younger, lighter, trying to make her snort. What was the last thing she said to you? I asked. His face changed, closed off for a second, like I'd touched a bruise. You don't have to, I started. No, he said. No, I want to. He took a breath, let it out slowly. It was the morning of the accident. She was running late for work. I was making coffee and she came rushing through the kitchen, grabbing her keys, her bag. She kissed me on the cheek. She always did that. Every morning, even when we were fighting. And she said, "Don't forget to pick up milk on your way home." He stopped, swallowed hard. That was it. Don't forget to pick up milk. The last words my wife ever said to me, and they were about fucking milk. His voice cracked on the last word. I squeezed his hands tighter. And the worst part, he continued, I forgot. I got the call from the hospital and I went and I stayed there for 6 hours while they tried to save her. And when I finally came home, when I walked into this empty house, I realized I'd forgotten the milk. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. I stood in the kitchen and I laughed. Because she was gone, the love of my life was gone, and I'd still forgotten the fucking milk. And I thought, she'd never let me live this down. If she could see me, she'd be giving me so much shit right now. I could feel tears on my own cheeks now. She would, wouldn't she? Oh, absolutely. He smiled. And it was the saddest, most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. She'd be standing right there, arms crossed, shaking her head. Daniel Hartley, I gave you one job. We both laughed. Quiet, watery laughs that hurt and healed at the same time. I bought milk the next day, he said, and the day after that. And every day for 2 years. I have so much milk in that fridge. Emma thinks I'm obsessed with cereal. You're not obsessed with cereal. No. His eyes met mine. I'm just trying to do the one thing she asked me to do. Even though it doesn't matter anymore. Even though she's not here to see it. And that's when I understood. Really understood. He didn't need someone to fix him. He didn't need someone to tell him to move on or be strong or let go. He needed someone to sit in the wreckage with him and say, it's okay to still love her. It's okay to still miss her. It's okay to buy milk every day for 2 years because it's the last thing she asked you to do. He needed someone to see him, not the ghost everyone else saw, not the cautionary tale, not the widower, but him, Daniel. A man who loved his wife so much he was still trying to keep promises to her ghost. She'd be proud of you, I said quietly, for still trying, for still loving her. His eyes filled again. You think so? I know so. When he finally looked up at me, really looked at me, his eyes were different, softer, clearer, like something inside him had finally exhaled after holding its breath for 2 years. And that's when everything shifted. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't some grand romantic revelation with swelling music and a kiss in the rain. It was small moments, stretched over weeks, each one building on the last like stones in a foundation. Him texting me on a random Tuesday, "Coffee? I'm buying." Me staying later after visiting Emma, long after she'd gone to bed, just to sit with him in the quiet. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes silence was enough. Him laughing, actually laughing at something stupid I said, and the sound of it filling the house like light breaking through clouds. Emma heard it from upstairs and came down, staring at her father like she'd just seen a ghost come back to life. "Dad?" she'd said, cautious. "You okay?" "Yeah, sweetheart." He'd smiled at her, and it reached his eyes. "Yeah, I think I am." Later, she pulled me aside. "I don't know what you're doing," she said, "but keep doing it. He seems different." I didn't know how to tell her that different meant healing, that her father was finally learning how to live again instead of just exist. The night it changed, really changed, was in mid-December. The house was decorated for Christmas for the first time in 2 years. Emma had insisted and Daniel had agreed, and I'd helped them string lights and hang ornaments. Kathy's ornaments, the ones that had been packed away. Emma had gone out with friends and I'd stayed behind, claiming I was tired. Daniel and I were in the kitchen making dinner. He was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry and I was stirring pasta, and the radio was playing some old jazz song, Ella Fitzgerald maybe, or Billie Holiday. The kitchen smelled like garlic and ginger. The Christmas lights twinkled in the living room. And for the first time since I'd met him, Daniel looked peaceful. He glanced over at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Something warm and uncertain and terrifying. "I don't know what you did," he said quietly, setting down the knife. "But I feel like I can breathe again." I set down the spoon, turned to face him. "You did it yourself. I just stayed." "No one else did." "Then they're idiots." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar and something warm, something that made my heart stutter. Close enough that I could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "I'm too old for you," he said, but it wasn't a rejection. It was a question, a fear. "Tell me this isn't crazy. Tell me I'm not imagining this." My heart was pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. "You're not too broken for me." Something flickered across his face. Relief, wonder, fear. "I'm 23 years older than you." "I know." "You're Emma's best friend." "I know." "This is... People will talk. They'll say terrible things." "Let them." I stepped closer, closing the last bit of distance between us. "I don't care what they say. I care about you." His hand came up, hesitant, and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered on my cheek. They were warm now, steady. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered. "You won't." "I don't want to be a mistake you regret." "You couldn't be." "How do you know?" I put my hand over his, pressed it against my cheek. "Because I see you, Daniel. Not the ghost everyone else sees, not the broken widower. You. And what I see is someone who loves deeply, who feels deeply, who's been drowning for 2 years and is finally coming up for air. That's not a mistake. That's beautiful." His eyes searched mine, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that I didn't mean it. He wouldn't find it, because I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. And when he kissed me, it wasn't desperate or hungry. or rushed. It was soft, careful, grateful. Like he'd been holding his breath for 2 years and I was the first gulp of air. Like he was afraid I'd disappear if he held on too tight. So I held on for both of us. I kissed him back, my hands sliding up to his shoulders, his arms wrapping around my waist, pulling me closer. The pasta boiled over on the stove, the jazz played on, the Christmas lights twinkled, and for the first time in 2 years, Daniel Hartley was alive. Not just existing, not just surviving, living. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. His eyes were closed. He was smiling. "What do we do now?" he whispered. I smiled back. "We figure it out. Together." "Emma, we'll tell her when the time is right." "People will. Let them talk." I pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "I'm not afraid of them. Are you?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. "Not anymore." And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a scandal. This wasn't something to be ashamed of. This was 2 broken people finding each other in the wreckage and deciding to build something new. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever been part of.